You ready? Okay. Good morning. Sorry for the rush start. We have a hard stop, so we'll get what we can, and then we'll have to continue the topic. I noticed a particular pattern in the history of the Goyin. Like there's a certain mystique, particularly when it comes to like the history of his minhagim, his halachas, his shitas. There's a certain mystique around the Goyin that goes as follows. There's like a whole handful of minhagim, or halachas, or ideas, or plans that the Goyin sought to implement. The Goyin wanted to make a change, do something, go somewhere, and he wasn't able to. And when his Talmidim, or the next generation, write about it, they write, Min ha-shemayim ikvu, I say. From Shemayim, they stopped him. Now, I could point out, like, I think offhand, 6 or 7 times, that the Goyin wanted to do something, say in halacha, or say in, in his own anhaga, or whatever, where the Talmidim write over that he was stopped Min ha-shemayim. Now, I assume that there's a lot of Greisig Gedolim who tried to make shinuyim like this or like that, or tried to institute a new halacha, or a new minig, and Layal Sabiyadim, it just wasn't matzliach. For some reason, the Goyin, I was thinking about it, for some reason, because the Goyin is so larger than life, is so much bigger than everything and everybody, so I don't think there's any way, the only way to like rationalize how the Goyin's psak, or the Goyin's hanhaga, or the Goyin's desire to change something didn't come to fruition is like min shemayim ikvu. Meaning Hashem didn't want him to. He got some sort of simon Shemayim. This was not the right thing to do, because the Goyin, there's no bar plukta with the Goyin, so to speak, in his lifetime. The Goyin was the Goyin, So, and even Talmidim writing over later, the Talmidim always wrote about the Goyin like he was mishichmei l'mayla from everybody else around him, at the same. So, I think there became like this type of thing where in Shemayim ikvu. Now, I'll give you a few of the examples. Lamashal, the Goyin wanted to go live in Eretz Yisrael. The Talmidim, when they write about him, Shemayim ikvu. The Goyin wanted to be buried in tzitzis. He instructed his Talmidim. That's really worthy of discussing on its own as a whole topic. There's a Taisvis and Menachos that seems to say the Dara Midbar was buried in tzitzis. The Gemara seems to say it, the Gemara in Babas, where Taisvis handles it. The Goyin seemingly instructed his Talmidim that he should be buried in tzitzis, but on the way there, the Talmud, who was instructed to make sure they don't passel his tzitzis, had a major stomachache, ran to the bathroom for 5 minutes. By the time he came back, they passeled the Goyin's tzitzis, and the Talmud said, Min ha-shemayim, they didn't want the Goyin to have tzitzis. The Goyin wanted to be mevatel slichas on Hoshana Rabbah. He wasn't, the day he tried, one of his Talmidim was nifter, he wasn't able to do it, Min ha-shemayim ikvu. The Goyin wanted, there's many more. I could give you probably 7 or 8 examples of this, of the Goyin, Min ha-shemayim ikvu. He wanted to do something and it didn't happen. One of the most glaring examples is, in the Hakdama to the Bir Hagra and Shulchan Aruch, the Goyin's own children write, that the Goyin as a young man said that it's his intention to write a Shulchan Aruch that's going to take everything, Sai halacha, Sai Kabbalah, every source, every makar, and really put it through the blender again and come out with one psak for everybody. None of this, Ramah, Mechaber, Levush, Shach, Taz, Magen Avram, all these layers. It's confusing, it's complex, and in the Goyin's Hashara, they're arguing about things that are not really machleksim, they're misunderstandings, they're not all, the whole picture. The Goyin had an agenda, matara, to put out a Shulchan Aruch that would put everything in one and like straighten it all out. Maybe the Goyin might have said that he needs to do it in Eretz Yisrael, maybe he didn't say he needs to do it in Eretz Yisrael. But B'chalef and his children, when they're publishing the Bir on Shulchan Aruch, they write, when his father was old and they asked the Goyin, what happened to this new Shulchan Aruch you intended to write? The Goyin said, Min ha-shemayim, they showed me, she'ein adar roi lekach. This is not, it's not the right time, not the right place. So again, you see that same theme. Now, one of the most negeidik daily halachas that the Goyin sought to change, and Niskayim Machshava says Tzadik Lemechza, we'll see, but that he wanted to change, that it was Layal Sabiyadeh, that he saw Simon ha-shemayim, was duchening. Now, that is as follows, meaning everybody knows that Ashkenazim don't duchen every day. When that minig started, why that minig started, Mitzvah will get into that exactly, all the different time and different sibis in the Paiskim. Sfardim do duchen every day, and in Eretz Yisrael, we duchen every day also. Ashkenazim duchen also. Now, the story with the Goyin's involvement in it goes as follows. The Goyin, now this is I don't want to sound too partisan over here, but the Welt says that the Welt I think thinks that the worst thing that happened in the fight with the Chassidim and the Misnagdim was that the Baal Tanya someone was malshin on the Baal Tanya went to jail. It became like a formative moment for Chassidus when the Baal Tanya was put in jail. Baal Tanya got out, as a yamtif when the Baal Tanya got out. It's a formative moment for Chassidus and Chassidim, the Baal Tanya's imprisonment. Now, what not as many people know is that probably the first gadol who went to prison over the fight with Chassidim and Misnagdim was the Vilna Goyin. The Goyin went to prison, it's 10 or 15 years before the Baal Tanya went to prison. I think our yamtif department is much weaker, and therefore we didn't, there's no yamtif when he went in, there's no yamtif when he went out. It's less it's less chal. So instead it just gets like faded away, to the sands of history. And at the story of the Goins going to jail, why he went to jail, who was involved in sending him to jail, became like a very, very vague story. Now, the basic story, as I could tell from the different svarim and books that write about it, is Vilna, it seems, like a lot of big towns in those days, had a raging war over the Rabbanos in Vilna. The last Rav of Vilna was a Rav by the name of Shmuel ben Avigdor. He was an Edim by a big Gvir in town, and when he was appointed to the Rabbanos, which often, if you know about the European history, in that kuf a few hundred years ago, often had to do with money. Rabbanos and money, were like a hand in a glove. And Shmuel ben Avigdor, who was a legitimate Talmud Chacham, I don't mean to say anything bad, he was a legitimate Talmud Chacham, and Pashas the Goyin had nothing against him, was appointed to be Rav of Vilna because his father-in-law had a lot of money, and because his father-in-law was very wealthy and was in charge of the town, the city. A lot of the conditions that were usually put on Rabbanim, a lot of the limitations that Rabbanim, like what they're allowed to be involved in, and how much they get paid, and where they're allowed to speak, and when they speak, and a lot of the limitations that gave the Kahal, its power and limited the Rabbanim's power, were not put into place. Because this was a Rav who was like he was a product of the Kahal, so to speak, meaning the head of the Kahal, the Gvir, the biggest Gvir in town, was his father-in-law. So he got the Steller with like very friendly terms, let's say. Once his father-in-law died, other members of the Kahal jumped up and said, okay, that was nice while your father-in-law was alive. That's great. It's time for a renegotiation. Now we're going to have, we're going to box you in the way a Rav is supposed to be treated. Which is a very common thing in those days. And the fight started raging. Of course, there's people who, jumped to his defense. There's people who were against him. And the fight went on for like 25 years, off and on. There was psharis, and there was fighting again. And if you look through, then there's like svarim, like Ir Vilna, other svarim that bring. If you look through the different, Pinkas books and but the dinim, psakim, you'll see that Vilna was embroiled in this major battle between its Rav and the Kahal for many, many years. Now, as like an offshoot of this battle, l'chaira, the Chassidim and the Misnagdim fight started. The Kahal was very against the Chassidim. The Goyin was very against the Chassidim, but maybe not for exactly the same reasons. Maybe they overlapped sometimes. It's hard to piece together exactly what. Now, at a certain point, there was a guy, a kid. His name was Hirsch something. I think his Goyish name was Lugwid Hirsch, maybe they called him. At 19 years old, he decided to leave his household and become a Christian convert. He ran to a monastery in the outskirts of Vilna, and he converted to Catholicism. Now, the town in Vilna was desperate to bring him back, and they hatched a plan where there was a certain Meshumad who was already, in Ishtamah, the guy who was already fry, who was having some sort of, he felt a little bad that he abandoned his Kehillah. He also felt that he could use a little bit of extra cash, and he was willing, for the Kehillah to pay him. He would break into the monastery and try to sneak out this young boy who had converted to Catholicism. And who exactly hatched the plan, who was involved in the plan, what the pratim of the plan is all kind of very vague. It does seem that the Goyin, this convert who was going to now become a kidnapper, met the Goyin 3 times. The Goyin was not the Rav of Vilna, he was the Gadol Hador, but he wasn't the Rav of Vilna. He met the Goyin 3 times for the Goyin to explain to him exactly, pratim or tell him things. Now, the plan goes into action. They kidnap this young boy, this convert. They, spirit him out of town to hide him somewhere. And eventually the police get involved, and a Meiser, who by all accounts was probably a Frum Yid, goes to the government and tells the local government of Vilna, which is actually a sniff of Poland at that time, who exactly is involved, up to and including the Goyin, who he is Ma'ashem. We have some of the documents. He says the Goyin steals money from the Kahal, the Goyin is the organizer of this, etc., etc. Now, l'chaira, this man who was the Malshin over here was Hasidish. It's pretty clear from who his family was, and which part of Vilna they came from, that he was a Hasidish person, an early Chassid in Vilna at the time. You could take a look at the sources. This is a big point of contention, so I don't know, I can't say one way or the other for sure, but it's a big point of contention. Probably it was Hasidish. Some of the critiques that he says about the Goyin over there is that the Goyin thinks he's in charge of things. He's just matal chayrim al kol mishu reitza. He puts charamas on everybody that he wants. Now, we only know of one chayrim that the Goyin signed on in his entire career, is the chayrim against the Hasidim in Vilna, in that time. So there's a lot of circumstantial evidence and thing that leads to this way. So like I said, it's one of these things that are still a little bit shaded and dark, because we don't really know exactly who, what, when, or how. But it's Yitachin that the Baal Tanya is not the first Gadol who went to prison over the fight of Hasidim and Misnagdim. Now, the Goyin, it's a whole Langa Maisa, and on a day like today, we certainly don't have time to go into it, but the Goyin was brought to prison a few times. The Goyin went to prison twice in this event. Once for questioning for about 10 days or something, in the summer, I think, of 88 or 89. And then once again, when they finished the questioning, like 3 years later, the Gaon and 21 other Kahal members of Vilna were sentenced to 12 weeks of prison. And the Gaon already being like a 70-year-old man and being who he was, so there was, ability to bribe, to cajole the authorities, and the Gaon only ended up in house arrest, where it seems he had access to a shul, and some of his Talmidim were able to come visit him, and also it seems he got early release. We don't know exactly how many weeks he sat in prison, probably like 5 or 6 weeks, and eventually the Gaon got early release, probably through some sort of bribe, and that's the Gaon's career in prison. Now, the fight has to do with Vilna's long-standing fight, the Kahal, the Misnagdim, the Chassidim. It's a fight that has to do with all the regular things that were being fought about in Vilna. But when the Gaon came out of prison for the first time, he said 2 things, Al Pi Mesorah. First, he asked for a Sefer Torah to be brought so he could learn all the parashiyos that he missed during his time in prison. He wanted to be mashlim the parashiyos that he missed. He missed 4 or 5 parashiyos. This is the first time he was in prison. So the second time he was in prison. No, I'm sorry. I don't know. I don't remember which one. One or the other. And the second thing that he said is we have to abandon my idea to duchen every day. Meaning, the Gaon had planned in his shul to start duchening every day. He wanted to reinstate the alter minig of duchening and do it every single day. And the Gaon said the reason why I was in prison, what this is a simon min hashamayim, that I'm not supposed to duchen. We're not supposed to duchen in Galus. It's not what we're supposed to do. And let's abandon our plan to duchen. So the Gaon, again, add this to the set of simonim min hashamayim for the Gaon's, ambitions to change Benhagim, to change halachas, or etc., is the Gaon understood this imprisonment, this whole story of him going to jail and etc., as a simon min hashamayim, that duchening that the Gaon had seeked to reinstate was not a good thing. So now, Lamaisa, the Gaon's Talmidim ultimately go up to Eretz Yisrael, and they're the ones who establish a lot of the Minhagim in Eretz Yisrael for Ashkenazim, and they're the ones who pushed very hard to have duchening every single day in Eretz Yisrael. And today in Eretz Yisrael, even Ashkenazim in most cities in Eretz Yisrael duchen every single day. So the Gaon's vision of bringing duchening back, Lachas HaTorah L'Yoshna, definitely comes to fruition in a certain sense, but not directly. So now I want to talk about a little bit the sugya of duchening every day, the different places that are exceptions, why yeah, why no, etc. So now, if you look in the Manei HaMitzvahs, you'll see klar that the mitzvah of duchening, the chinuch says it lahadya, but others also, the mitzvah of duchening is for every day. V'samu shmi al bnei Yisrael, v'ani avarchim, this bracha that the Kahanim are supposed to go and give I'll read you the chinuch in mitzvah Shinai and Ches. The chinuch says shenitztavu HaKahanim sheyivarchu Yisrael b'chol yom shenemar kois avarchos bnei Yisrael amar lahem. There's a mitzvah lahadya that Kahanim should bench Yisrael every single day, like it says kois avarchu. If you look in the Gemara in Sotah, Naflam Chasam Beis, and I think the Naikel here is learning it, the Gemara says, Amar B'Shub and Levi, a few different things, but Minayin Shakadosh Baruch Hu Misavel L'Birchas Kahanim. How do you know that Kadosh Baruch Hu has a taiva for Birchas Kahanim? Shenem V'Samu Shmi Abnei Yisrael V'Ani Avarchim. Amar B'Shub and Levi, Kol Kayin Shem Avarch Mizbarach. And then it says further, Amar B'Shub and Levi, Kol Kayin She'ena Oil L'Duchen, Over B'Shleisha Asay. Any Kayin who doesn't duchen is over in 3 assays, meaning it's a mitzvah for every day, it's a big mitzvah. Duchening every day is a wonderful thing. And this is without going into the Kabbalistic and skula, the other stuff about the brachas that are shayra and etc. But just from a pure halachic standpoint, duchening every day is a mitzvah that's desired. Now, Memela, the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber, and Tzimkuf Chavches, and the Beis Yosef, and Tzimkuf Chavches, paskin lahadya, that duchening should be every single day, like the Rishonim say, like the Rambam says, like the Chinuch says, duchening should be every day, and that's why the minig, by almost all Svardim, we'll see there's exceptions, by almost all Svardim, is to duchen every single day. Now, in the Beis Yosef, he already brings that he's aware of an Ashkenazi minig not to duchen every day, and he starts addressing what the reason for that is. So let's go in order. We'll start with the Beis Yosef, the Darkei Moshe, we'll get to the Ramah himself, and then we'll break this down. So the Beis Yosef says as follows. He says, Kasav ha'agur, shenishal mari mulin. These are Ashkenazi Rishonim from, let's say, 750, 800 years ago, Pachas Yoser. Lama ein ha'kayanim noisin kapayim b'chol yom. Why don't Kahanim duchen every day? Me'achashu mitzvah saseh. The Heishav, he says, M'resha minig ha'kahanim litval, kaidem, the Goyis Maimonides, which is a collection of Ashkenazi Psakim, says that the minig was for Kahanim to go to the mikveh before they duchen, he says. In the winter, in the Rhineland, in Germany, it's brutal to go to the mikveh every day. So it's not negay to go to the mikveh every single day. So the minig became the Kahanim only duchen on Yom Tif. He says, V'gam mitam bitul malacha, also because of bitul malacha, because it takes time the Elam has to get to work already. The Elam has to get to work, and it's not negay to duchen every single day. I'd kind of shine it. So says the Beis Yosef, Dachak atzma the kayim minig mekaymai. The Agur is pushing himself to be mekayim minig mekaymai. Ve'enei maspik. It's a shvachat taimim. Kimashi kasav b'nei shenoig in Litval. This that he writes about going to the mikveh, he says that's a kula chumra maybe the kula. You tell me you want to do a shein zach, go to the mikveh every day before you duchen, and because of that you're not going to duchen. That's the epitome of a chumrah mevil de kula. That's not acceptable, he says. And this that he tells me that they have to go to work, he says, come on. I'm not even taking that seriously. That's not a real reason. This is what the Beis Yosef says, because the reasons that the Agur says. Comes along the Darkei Moshe. Darkei Moshe says as follows. Darkei Moshe in Sim Kuf Chav Ches and Ois Chav Aleph, he says as follows. V'ani omer ki atam shechashvu heim l'tafel hu ha'ikr. The reason, because people have to go to work, is what that the Beis Yosef treated as mamish like a sniff, as a throwaway, is really the main reason. And he says an interesting nekuda. He says, Ki machmas bitul malacha la'am shebe'elu aratzah shekehana va'am trudim b'michyasan begalusan. In this bitter galus, this dark galus of Germany, where the Ashkenazim lived, where they're trying to earn their panas of ein lem lefarnis b'nei beisim, people don't have what to eat. Kiyam alechem asher yilkatu b'zei asapim, only whatever little bread they could gather with the sweat of their brow. Dvar yem b'yom v'hem trudim l'michyasan ve'einam shruyim b'simcha. He says the Ramah, the Darkei Moshe adds in a kuda. He says they're not happy. People are miserable. I wouldn't speak for Litvaks B'chlal. I would never say such a thing, but it could be that the Ramah is saying that the Litvish Island, they're miserable. They're not happy over here. And it's yes, truth in Parnasa doesn't mean physically they don't have the 30 seconds that it takes to duchen. That's not what it means. It means a guy comes into shul on a Monday morning. He's just not in the mood. He's not happy. And Hayos, we know that Simcha is a big ikr by duchening. It has to be b'simcha. The mitzvahs that should be b'simcha. So Mamela they don't do it. He says v'af b'Shabbos einim noisim kapeim. Even on Shabbos, they should trudim machshavasim v'herhurim ma'aisi yadeim sha'avru v'shasidim liyas. Their mind is not shut off. The situation they find themselves in is such that even on Shabbos they're still thinking about what happened during this week, what's going to happen next week, and they're not in the frame of mind, the proper simcha frame of mind to duchen. So it becomes Yom Tif, everybody's happy. You have time to really switch it off and spend a few days with the family. Yom Tif, everyone's happy. Yom Tif, we could duchen. As I said, the Darkei Moshe is much more masber the thing. So he takes what the Beis Yosef, so to speak, thought was a throwaway and didn't understand in its full glory, and he fleshes it out, he puffs it up, and he says, this is really what's going on. This is the main sibut to stop. Now, if you look in Shulchan Aruch and Sim Kuf Chav Ches and Sif Mem Daled, the Shulchan Aruch says, the Mechaber says, that a kohen should duchen every single day. Comes along the Ramah says, Nagu b'chol medinas elu, where we're from, she'ein noisin kapeim ela b'Yom Tif. We only duchen on Yom Tif. Why? Mishum she'az shruyim b'simchas Yom Tif v'toiv leiv hu yivarach. Because then people are very happy, they're in a good mood. Toiv leiv hu yivarach. Mashenkim shayam, and the rest of the days we can't say that about. Afilu b'Shabbos hashana shetrudim b'herhurim al mechyasim v'al bitam malachtam. Afilu b'Yom Tif ein noisin kapeim al b'tfilas Musaf. Even on Yom Tif only duchen by most of the time. So the Ramah comes and he codifies this. He mamish says nothing about the mikveh. If you notice, the Ramah doesn't breathe a word about going to the mikveh for tefillah, because the Ramah holds you don't have to go to the mikveh before a kayin duchen. It's takenat halacha. Doesn't bring a word about it. All he says is this: that people are busy with the malachtam, and therefore they're not, they're not in the mood. Now, this is the opening to treat this minig to not duchen every day as a very, very subpar minig. Meaning, the Goyin was not the first one by far to question this and say, come on, like forever we're in a bad mood and we can't duchen. Like, meaning, I hear you tell me there was a minig that developed and they weren't able to duchen everything forever. And the Magen Avram right away, the Magen Avram over here says, he says, "Kasav the minig garuahu." The Magen Avram writes right away, the minig to not duchen every day is a minig garua. It's not a, it's not a starka minig. Now we have a hard stop, so we're going to hold it here. I will either, Bez Hashem, record the rest later in the week, or we'll continue next week. But there's a lot more to get over here.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.